My Jesus is different than yours. That's a challenge as I try to bring more life into a relatively dead town, nation, world, which is what Jesus called us to do, is it not? They have Jesus, and it's not the one that I know. It's not the one that I follow. Please prepare to pause this video in just a moment. If you were to select a well-known figure in history, in the world today, in the movies, fiction, that comes to your mind when you think, okay, well, so the Jesus that I know, the Jesus that I follow is like this person or that person. Please spend a moment and think of who those 2 or 3 people might be. Not that they're exactly like him, not that they're playing him in some movie. No, as I said, someone from fiction, from literature, from history. Well, boy, if I had to point to a person, I don't want to, but if I had to, this person is sort of the epitome of Jesus as I know him. Please pause until you have that in mind and then continue. In just a few seconds, I'll go on. Okay, so with you now having that in mind, I'll tell you 2 that certainly are not Jesus, but if I would try to impart to someone who's the Jesus that I know, the king in Lord of the Rings, particularly in the last, toward the end of the movie, they are, the king and his forces are encircled by 1,000, an army outnumbering them by 1,000. And the king is on a horse, putting life back into his troops in a life and death battle. The other one is Sergeant Foley in the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, who takes a dead soul. Zach Mayo is his name in the movie, I think, and brings him alive. The king in Lord of the Rings, Sergeant Foley in An Officer and a Gentleman, are who I point to if I try to communicate in more concrete terms, more visceral terms, the Jesus that I follow. Jesus is my king of the type in Lord of the Rings. He's my inspiration, he's my guidance. He is the one that I follow into battle every day, a battle of the intensity and the danger of Lord of the Rings, of a physical, material, violent type? No. Spiritual warfare, absolutely as deadly, just as it was deadly for Jesus for the same reason. And Sergeant Foley gave instructions urgently, harshly, He made demands urgently, harshly, so that those under his command would survive battle. That is the Jesus that I have in my life, and I do not feel clever. I simply find that Jesus coming off the page, out of the words of the Bible? No. Of Mark, Luke, and Matthew, where his instructions are to be found, where his example is to be found. When I go into a church and attend their service, it is heartbreaking for me that they have the Jesus that they have, because they do not have the Jesus that I have. It's heartbreaking for me. The life that I have in me is a consequence of the Jesus that I know. I don't see it in except the rare exception. The Jesus that the pastor preaches is not a Sergeant Foley. It's an Easter bunny. It's a Santa Claus. It's the friendly neighborhood therapist. It is not the Jesus of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It is the Jesus of Christianity, as written, as taught, as practiced. And it just doesn't bring the life that the Jesus of Matthew, Luke, and Mark. The Jesus, get thee behind me, Satan. The Jesus, you are like whited sepulchres, beautiful on the outside, full of dead man's bones on the inside. It is not the Sergeant Foley, you hypocrites. It is not the Sergeant Foley, let the dead bury their dead. Well, it's pretty easy to understand why people don't want that, because we've been taught to have our head in our flesh, not our souls in charge. But the soul has no interest in the Christian Jesus. Those that stay in the church just find ways to ignore it and follow the Sergeant Foley, the king leading into battle. But the masses just go along with the opiate, and it is tragic. It is heartbreaking. It is not for me to interfere with. It is not for me to actively rebuke. It is for me to follow my king, to follow my drill sergeant. And maybe I'll be the leaven that way for one or two souls around me. It's certainly my best chance. And why do I need a Sergeant Foley? Why do I need a king? Because I can't stand the way the world is. I can't stand what's being done to my brothers and sisters in the church and outside the church. I can't stand it. I don't care about dying physically. Doesn't concern me. I can't stand the way the world as it is. I don't have the ability to fight it on my own. I at least need a leader that I believe in, that is further along than I, and Jesus is that leader. I need a drill sergeant. Those terrified soldiers in Lord of the Rings needed a king. The people in Jesus' day desperately needed a king. The outcasts, they couldn't stand the way the world was. They couldn't stand what the Roman Empire was doing to them. They couldn't stand what the religious establishment was doing to them. They needed a king. They needed a leader. They prayed for one that they could sing to, that they could worship, whatever that means, that could solve their personal problems, that could lead them to change the world, that could lead them to a possibly better world in this life, in this time, and if not, at least lead them to a meaningful way of dying. That's what I want. I can't survive this horrible man-made hell world without it, and with it, I have joy.